I've been thinking a lot about diversity lately. It's a sacred cow in our culture, right? Of course, diversity is the right thing. It's the United States. We're the melting pot. It's kind of built into our DNA, right? Not really. Not really. Diversity is good sometimes, and it's absolutely terrible at others. Let's look at it. I can remember 15 years ago, I was up in Seattle. It was the springtime, and they have a tulip festival up there that is really kind of a visual spectacle beyond anything I'd ever seen before. I drove, I think, 20 miles outside of the city, and once you arrive at these fields, your breath is kind of taken away just by the optical spectacle of the whole thing, right? You park, and as far as you can see, red tulips. It feels like it's until they get to the base of the mountains. It's just red tulips, and white tulips over here, and yellow tulips over there. These just big blocks of color. And it's absolutely gorgeous. And part of what makes it gorgeous is the uninterrupted purity of the color. Visually, when you see it, it just fills your eyes with red, fills your eyes with white, fills your eyes with yellow. And just the physics of that is a very satisfying experience. There was also a plot that had all of the different tulips all mixed up together. It was red and yellow and purple and white, and all manner of, all the colors were just all together, mixed up. And I got to tell you, it was not appealing to me. It was not attractive. If I had to pick which field I wanted to be in, it would absolutely be one of the fields that was of a solid color. The mixed up ones were just it was a bit unsettling to me. This is not inconsistent with the way we are as living creatures. Living creatures have a tendency from the highest to the lowest order of our species to want to associate with familiar things. If you put a horse at the 50-yard line of a football field, and you had red horses at one end of the field and white horses at the other end of the field, that horse would most naturally go to the color, its own color. It would go to the red ones. If it was a white horse, it would more naturally go to the white horses. A black horse would more naturally go to the black horse, because there is something within our limbic system, within the fundamental part of our nature and our psychology, that finds security in familiarity. It just is what it is. And that's okay. That being said, and we'll eventually get to my point, I grew up in mixed neighborhoods. I love diversity. I'm diverse. My 23andMe profile would show that I'm very diverse. I have a good amount of European in me. I have a good amount of, what did they call it? It's, my father was from Honduras, so there's a Indian, Asian kind of thing that goes on toward that part of my bloodline. But yeah, those are the two primary, that probably makes up 85-90% of me. I'm diverse, but then I've got a little bit of African thrown in there. I think I have I think I've got 0.01% of Ashkenazi Jew in there. So, shalom. I grew up in mixed neighborhoods. I went to mixed schools. I played on mixed teams. I'm very comfortable. I live in a mixed neighborhood until it started to gentrify. I'm very comfortable with that. I probably have a preference for mixed neighborhoods, just because it was my mother's milk. there's an idea about psychological anchoring, that the ducklings will follow the first thing that seems to walk like a mother in front of them. And they'll follow a dog, they'll follow a human, they'll follow just about anything as long as you have a sense of knowing where you're going. And that was the same way with me. And I just kind of got anchored to colored, to brown. The first eyes that I really remember were probably, aside from my mother's, were, a woman in Central America. Her brown eyes and her brown skin. She took care of me for several years. Always had caretakers. My parents both worked, so we weren't wealthy. We just had enough to be able to afford to have someone watch me. So I'm quite happy with diversity in my own world. But the question becomes, is it always better? And I would say no. It feels like we've come up with this kind of rule that if it's good with one race, it'll be better if we mix a bunch of other races into whatever organization we're looking at. And I think that we can tear that apart very quickly. It just doesn't align with reality if you think through it. It used to be that we would go see Alvin Ailey and his dance troupe. They would come through town every year. They still do. We just don't go as often. And it's quite the experience. It's absolutely Black aesthetic on parade, right? You have these beautiful, long, lean bodies doing this, African-inspired choreography with this, African-inspired music. And it is not only the movement of it all, but it is the visual of it all. All of those Black bodies, all of that Blackness concentrated into that cultural moment. Never at any point while I have watched Alvin Ailey, his troupe perform, never at any point did I ever say, what would make that better? If we had some Japanese people out there dancing with them, that would make it better. Or some Irish people. That would make this Alvin Ailey, that would take it over the top. It's good with all those Black folks out there right now, doing that Black choreography with that Black music, with that Black aesthetic, doing this whole concentrated cultural expression. That's not good enough. No, we need diversity in there. And ditto Riverdance. Remember, was it Irish? The Irish Riverdance with the guys, dancing with their hands at their sides and just tightly precise line dancing, just thrilling athleticism, choreography, just a beautiful expression of their cultural heritage. I loved it. They went on a world tour. Everybody loved it. Just like everybody loved Alvin Ailey. But at no point while I was watching Riverdance did I ever say, what we really need? We really need some brothers out there. It just never occurred to me that the distilled beauty and essence of this culture at the highest level of its performance needed some diversity into it to improve it. Any more that we needed, yellow flowers in that red field of tulips, or any more than we needed white flowers in that Black field of tulips. There were actually Black tulips at some point. So, no, it isn't better by default just to mix things up. But sometimes I want to mix things up intentionally. There are times when I am building a team, let's say a music, a band, and sometimes I want it to be mixed. When I think of Weather Report, Joe Zawinul, the Polish keyboardist and kind of the father of the band, pulled together one of the greatest lineups in the history of music, to my taste. He had a United Nations of ethnicity and race, and there is no way he could have produced the brilliance and genius of Weather Report as a musical ensemble without that diversity. He had to have Wayne Shorter and Jaco Pastorius and all of those players were handpicked for this specific chemical contribution they made to this recipe, this musical recipe. Absolute genius. I've put together bands in a similar way, or music groups, where it's you have a sensitivity, and you know that you want a rock edge, but I want a funk bottom. So I how do I do that? It's a bit like casting a movie. And you need the flexibility. That it should never be forced diversity. I guess that's what rankles me the most, is forced diversity. It will happen of its own accord over time when diversity is beneficial. It just isn't always beneficial. Now, I can argue some science with you, and let's kind of steel man the opposite view. There is an argument in genetics, if we take it at the level of metaphor, called hybrid vigor. And to make a complicated thing hopefully relatively simple, hybrid vigor suggests that mutts, dogs of various breeds that are mixed together, tend to live longer and on average have healthier lives than purebreds do. A purebred poodle with a uninterrupted strain of poodles for the last 10 generations versus a pound dog that's got a little bit of everything in him. The pound dog is probably going to be more vigorous because of all of this mixed genetics. So there is an argument that mixing all those various strains kind of takes the best of all of them and optimizes in that way. It's just a little bit more complex when it comes to human systems. It's not so simple. You just don't throw a bunch of people in there. It can work against group cohesion. I want my groups to be connected. I want them to be on the same wavelength. I want them to have an esprit de corps. And sometimes having more people of a certain kind of ethnicity or other kind of marker, having more of them gives you a critical mass that allows you to get to that vibe in a way that just having a onesie, twosie, maybe, it's a very delicate thing. It's like cooking, and you're kind of seasoning, and you have to know your ingredients, and you have to know what you're going for. And you have to know also, one of the biggest things is you have to know not to stir too much. Sometimes we can become absent-minded and think that we really need to stir this thing up all the time. It's one of the flaws of being a young cook, right? Is stirring too much. Let it be. Let the flavors meld of their own accord. You don't want things sticking, but you don't want to tear them up by over-involving yourself in the process either. So relaxing and letting diversity take its own course, I think, is the best way. We tend to work it out. I can't help but think that the lunchroom is probably one of the best metaphors, the school cafeteria lunchroom. Back in the 70s when I was in junior high and high school, that was the biggest socializing period of the day. It gave you the best sense of how the groups would divide and, socialize among one another. And very naturally, during the course of lunch, it kind of just broke off by race. But there were always tables where people were mixing voluntarily. Those tended to be quite fun tables. And I like the way they naturally evolved. No one had to say, okay, here's going to be the mix table. And when you didn't have that, sometimes people would just naturally kind of, amble over to the other group. A black kid would come over to the white table if, he wanted to talk to me, or I would walk over to the black table if I wanted to talk to a friend over there. In many ways, I think we've kind of taken steps backwards. In many ways we haven't. In many ways we've, made such amazing progress. And I'm very proud of that. But this diversity thing, we've kind of hosed ourselves by stirring too much, trying too hard. I think we need to back off. Diversity will happen. But we need to let it happen organically. That's the best way for it to happen. All right? Peace.